My name is Bruce Murray, instructor for EU and US climate change mitigation, with 20 participants in the EU, United States, and other Paris Agreement countries at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. Together, we are exploring policy options to accelerate climate change mitigation, focusing on best practices in the European Union and the United States. Today, I have the distinct privilege of speaking with Dr. Fred Giertz in Illinois. Illinois is of particular interest to us given its model efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, for example, with its 2021 Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. There are few experts who match the expertise in Illinois economics that Dr. Giertz has developed. Dr. Fred Giertz has held a number of distinguished offices, including Executive Director of the National Tax Organization, Director of the University of Illinois Institute of Government and Board of Public Affairs, and Head of its Department of Economics. He is a member of the Board of Trustees of the State University Retirement System, SURS, including terms as Chair of the Board's Investment Committee. The board oversees the $18 billion retirement fund for Illinois Public University and college employees. Dr. Giertz also compiles the U of I Flash Index, a widely disseminated monthly indicator of the Illinois economy. Dr. Giertz, thank you very much for agreeing to consider our questions about the Illinois State University retirement system today.
Great, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I've been at the University of Illinois for a very long time, over 40 years, and the last 20 or 25 years I've been associated with the State University's retirement system, and that's been a learning experience in itself because I was never necessarily focused on investment decisions and things of that sort, but it turned out I've had a kind of education that has allowed me to delve into these kind of questions. I found them very interesting.
Okay, well, we want to benefit from your education and your expertise, so I'll start with question number one. The Illinois State University Retirement System Fiscal Year 2024 investment plan appeared last September. Could you briefly describe how such plans are developed?
Right. The State University retirement system actually is larger than was flashed up a little bit earlier. We're around $25 billion now. The data was a little old, but so it's a very large pension system. It serves basically employees of state universities and community colleges, plus a few auxiliary organizations. And it's not just for faculty, but it's for all employees. So it's a very large organization. But again, compared to places like California, it's very small. California has pension funds of $300 or $400 billion. We're 25, which is extremely large, but still not a giant compared to some of the others. The way we operate in terms of investing is that we're supposedly a pre-funded plan where when people are working, the employees and the employer, which is the state of Illinois, contribute to the fund. Those funds are used for investment purposes. And the goal then is to provide investment income for when people retire. Unfortunately, the state of Illinois has not always fully funded the system as they probably should have. So right now we're suffering from a long-term kind of underfunding situation, which is not catastrophic, but kind of a lingering problem where we're not fully funded right now, but the state is in a process of trying to make that up. So investments are a very important part of our activities. That's where a large amount of the funds come to provide benefits to our members. The process that we use is basically to not invest directly. SURS does not go out and buy shares of stock in a particular company or buy bonds of the government or corporate entities or whatever. What we do is to hire what we call money managers to make investments for us. And that allows us to have a fairly small staff in terms of investments, where we don't necessarily make the investments, we monitor the investments very, very carefully. And so our expertise comes from two sources. The first is the investment staff that we have, which are highly trained professionals. And then in addition to that, we also hire an outside consultant to make recommendations and evaluations. So most everything that we do, or the board does, the Board of Trustees is the decision-making body, is done on the basis of recommendations from our staff and from the external consultant. And therefore, we have a plan then, which is changed incrementally. Occasionally, we'll have a broad kind of reevaluation year to year. We basically have a plan about deploying our resources, and we make relatively small changes to that. So the plan for 2024 was based on where we've been for many years. And SURS has chosen to pursue a path that does not necessarily try to maximize return every year, but try to maintain a good deal of stability over the business cycle. And that allows us to invest in a number of different kinds of activities. So traditionally, investment funds and pension funds had two major areas where they invested. One was equity, stocks in various companies. Traditionally, it was mostly in the United States. Now it's much more worldwide. And the second area was debt, which was various kinds of bonds, government and private bonds. That's been expanded in the last decade or two into some other areas, including private equity, private lending, things of that sort, which promise, at least the promise, not necessarily always realized, of somewhat higher returns. So we have a very somewhat complicated portfolio of various kinds of instruments, and that's based upon our idea of trying to maintain a reasonable rate of return with also a reasonable rate of stability. So every year that we make these kind of decisions. Now, I probably should have made this disclaimer earlier. I'm describing the SURS activities to best of my ability, but I'm not officially representing SURS. I'm talking about my own view of that. I'm one of 11 members of the Board of Trustees who makes these decisions, and I'm not at this in this particular situation representing the Board of Trustees. I'm representing myself, but I'm trying to do it with an eye to kind of a balanced overview of the system. So again,
right.
Yes.
Thank you for saying that. I'm glad that we have that sense that you are speaking privately today. And you're already giving us a wealth of information. I have a quick follow-up question, and then I'd like to go on to question number two. What I'm understanding is that as an investment body, that you have a broad portfolio and likely are thinking about higher risk and lower risk investments. And the question is it fair to say that the body strives for that kind of longer term, somewhat lower risk stability?
Yes, that's an important consideration. Just to say, I'm checking. Are we still communicating?
Yes.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay, fine. Yeah, we have that long-term kind of plan. Now, getting back to the some of the environmental issues, we take that into account in two ways. We take it into account expressly because of various kinds of mandates for the state of Illinois and for other kinds of guidelines. So we're concerned about that. But we also would assume that our managers would take that into account because their goal is to provide good returns, good outcomes for us. and we would expect them to take into account environmental issues in terms of their everyday kinds of analysis of what to do and where to invest and things of that sort. So sort of there's a two-level sort of thing. The expectation would be that if we hire good managers, they're going to take into account these kind of issues, and they all assert that they are when we hire them. And secondly, we may take some other kinds of actions in addition to that may have environmental implications.
Let me jump in there for a second. It's possible that I froze for a minute for you, and I'd like to state the second question in my list. Let me know if you're able to hear it. And that has to do with the fiduciary issues that influence SURS investment planning. And I'd like it if you might be willing to describe those a little bit and perhaps elaborate on their influence.
That's extremely important for what we're talking about here. We're a pension fund that operates under various kinds of fiduciary rules established by the federal government and other kinds of oversight. And as a pension fund, our interest is to act in the sole interest of our beneficiaries, our participants and our annuitants. That being said, it suggests that we're only interested in the kind of things we talked about, a return and safety of our investments. But that doesn't mean we would not take into account environmental issues to the extent they affect that. So environmental issues are important, but they're not a separate kind of issue from the overall goal of providing benefits to our members. You could contrast this with an individual investor who might say, well, I'm willing to accept lower returns in order to invest in some activity which I think is good for society, good for the environment, whatever it might be. We can't expressly do that. We can't say, well, we're willing to take a lower rate of return because we're doing good for society. We have to operate for the sole benefit. But the point is that operating for the sole benefit of our members also means that we have to take into account environmental issues as well. So if you're running maybe a foundation or a church fund, or an individual might be willing to make explicit trade-offs saying, I'll accept lower returns with the payoff to me of having better things done for the environment. But we can't do that expressly in the operation of SURS. So if we make an environmental decision, we're making it because we think the environmental decision will accrue to the benefit of our investments.
I'd like to ask a kind of follow-up question about that too, that has to do with return on investment. And according to the International Energy Agency, global clean energy investment does seem to be surging and has outpaced fossil fuel energy investment for several years now. And I'm wondering if when the Board of Trustees, the investment committee, looks at what the managers decide to do, also seeing this trend toward more and more renewable energy investment, if you see that the managers are making decisions like that too, following in the trend. If you see any of that, can you describe it?
Well, I think we can, and it varies. Let me also go back. I should have mentioned something else when we talked about the portfolio. This may sound strange to people who aren't involved in investment decisions and portfolio analysis, but a lot of work the last 50 years suggests that one of the best ways to invest for an individual and to a certain extent for institutions is called passive investment, where you don't pick out particular stocks or particular activities. You simply invest in the whole index and you accept the returns of that index. Now, the argument for that is, first of all, it's a very low cost way of investing. And the second is that the expectation is that most things that impact the value of an investment actually are known to the greatest extent possible by what's going on in the market. So the market is a very, not a perfect, but a very efficient way of integrating information. So by investing in a passive kind of portfolio, which we do to a certain extent, we're buying a little bit of everything, which means we buy the companies that may be doing great things in terms of the environment. The other companies may not be doing much at all. And the argument there is that overall, we're going to get a better rate of return with lower risk, rather than trying to pick winners and losers, which is a very costly and very chancy kind of thing. Now, let me go into kind of an extended example, made up example, but I think it's useful. Let's say you have a company that understands environmental issues and is doing some kind of far reaching thinking about that, maybe making some very good decisions, and those decisions are well known to the market. Would that company then be a great investment and return usually high returns over the next 10, 20, 30 years? The answer is maybe no, because if people actually know that, you'd expect the price of that security to be driven up because of their good decisions. On the other hand, you might have a company which is not so environmentally conscious, and they're doing some things which are less than good. And say, would you ever invest in that company? The answer is possibly, because they might be a situation where you could come into the company, buy it, change their activities, and increase the value a great deal. So again, environmental investing would not necessarily mean just investing in firms that are in quotes, the good actors. You might also do a variety of things. There are also transitional issues. A very controversial one is in regard to fossil fuels. So most people believe that fossil fuels are probably ones that need to be reduced, if not eliminated, over a long period of time. But you might agree on that, but you might still invest in natural gas as a transition mechanism, going from coal to something better 5, 10, 20 years down the line. So the idea of not investing in any kind of fossil fuels would not necessarily be a good environmental decision. So it's a very complicated kind of situation. The other thing that we face not face, but we take into account at SURS is that environment is not the only thing on the agenda. There are a number of other issues in regard to equity issues, about income distribution, things of that sort, minority impacts on minorities, and so on. And there are also so-called governance issues about whether companies that you invest in are governed effectively. So all these three, in our analysis, are kind of mixed together. Some people emphasize more the equity diversity aspects. Other people emphasize more the environmental. But we have to sort of balance all these things together.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question about that too. In paragraph 6 of the SURS Fiscal Year 2024 investment plan on pages 14 and 15 describes its attention to environment, social, and governance issue, and says that it does so in compliance with relevant Illinois statutes. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that paragraph and help us understand it better, perhaps with a reference, if possible, to Illinois statutes that might come into play.
Right. In Illinois, there are some explicit kind of strictures we have to deal with. For example, it changes from time to time, but we're not supposed to have investments in the Sudan because of various kinds of human rights issues. More recently, there's been, if not outright restrictions, very, very strong suggestions that we divest of activities in Russia after the Ukraine war. So those kind of things are sometimes explicitly mandated by the state of Illinois, and we have to abide by those, even if we didn't want to, even if we thought it wasn't a good idea. We still have to abide by those things. So those are sort of a gross kind of screen about things you can do and can't do. The environmental issue is a little bit more general. It says that all of our investments must take into consideration not the impact on the environment, but the environmental impact on the investments themselves. So we have to take that into account, and we ask that every manager they have to know about this. They have to give us a kind of response about how they're dealing with it. So this is not a yes or no. You can't do this, you can't do that. It's more that they have to take that into account. Now, our expectation is that our managers would be doing that already. That just like a manager is going to take into account all kinds of things about differences in whether it's good to advertise more or less. They would also be interested in the impact of maybe climate change on investments, things of that sort. So we expect that to be done automatically, but in addition to that, they have to actually have to agree that they are doing it and give us a report about their actions. Now, there's also informational issue that information is valuable, but it's also extremely abundant. If you think about SURS, we probably have investments in 5,000, maybe 10,000 companies that in terms of equity. Now, it would be very, very difficult for us to monitor 5,000 different organizations who are dealing with diverse kinds of situations. So what we do is to hire an organization that is supposed to keep up on proxy voting activities of these firms. They provide kind of a report on these companies, but it's a very, very general, very broad kind of report, because as I said, no one has the capability of getting into great detail for 5,000 different firms about exactly what they're doing. So we have these kind of broad screens that we attempt to make sure they're abiding by the general rules. But to be honest, we don't have the ability to get into the depths of every company and see exactly what they're doing.
That is something that interests us quite a bit in the course. This process of gathering information, monitoring, and evaluating is part of that data revolution we're in the middle of right now. And one of the things that we have proposed in the course is that there be a really consistent effort to improve the gathering and monitoring of information, perhaps with a fairly uniform standard for evaluating the, let's say, the ESG performance of individual companies. And our understanding is that there are several definitions of ESG and several models used to gather and report on information. And I'm wondering, this is not one of the questions that I had planned to ask, but you're raising it for me. If you're satisfied with the kind of information that you're getting about the way too many companies you would have to evaluate if you didn't have kind of a survey monitoring service you could rely on.
Well, I think the answer is I'm not satisfied, but I'm not surprised either. It's because it's so complex. Let me give you a couple examples. Again, your students in the United States may be aware of this, but there are organizations that deal with the public utilities, especially electric utilities, and they rate them on environmental grounds. And a couple of years ago, the highest rated electric company, company providing electricity in the United States was PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. And that was, so again, they were the very highest in terms of environmentally sound providers of electricity. Well, that was before the situation in California where they had high winds and power lines were blown down, and there were all kinds of fires created, and ended up with a very serious kinds of environmental problem there. And when I asked about that, they said, well, we were talking about generation of electricity, not distribution of electricity. So if they had to do over again, they would have said PG&E was very good in terms of distributing. They weren't very good in terms of, I'm talking about generating, but not very good in terms of distributing it. Well, that was after the fact. Another example, this is not an environmental one, but a governance one. There's the famous case of a cyber currency organization that was Bankman-Fried was just punished for it, which was a $1 billion, maybe not a fraud, but at least a debacle. And up until about a year and a half ago, they were rated very high in terms of their governance, their governance structure. And in fact, they had fantastically poor governance structure. So reporting these things is very difficult. It takes a great deal of digging in, and with so many firms, it's very difficult to do that. So again, it's easy after the fact to say what should have been done. For another example is a case of Volkswagen, where they falsified some I think mileage standards, and they were criticized severely for that, and Germany took some action there. And we were told, well, that was a situation where ESG was very important, and it was, but in fact, no one told us ahead of time. It was after the fact that it happened. So it's very difficult to try to do this on a forward-looking basis. You can always look back and say what companies did poorly, but figure out in advance what they were doing, and then having some kind of action is a much more difficult kind of challenge.
Yeah, you in elaborating on those examples also reminded me of the ratings agencies in the time between 2005 and 2008, Moody's and others, who were
Right.
indicating the health of our bank system in the United States and individual banks, and with their lending practices and how that failed so immensely.
Yeah,
And
that was an amazing period. That was the one. The 2008 crisis was the one time in my lifetime that I've been. I'm always, I'm happy when bad things happen or when we have recessions. That was the one time where I really thought we were in a potential extremely serious kind of situation. And again, you had a situation where an investor would have a promise to pay. They'd also have it insured. So they said, what could go wrong when I have the promise of the borrower plus someone insure me against the risk, and these things didn't offset each other. And that was really the source of a lot of the problems. And again, I'm sorry, the one thing that we're good at is looking at what we should have done in the past. The question is, the next problem is not going to be the same as the problem of 2007 to 9. It's going to be a different kind of problem. So I don't think we'll have that happen again. But again, there's always a wild card. And the wildest card of all was the COVID situation, which I think no one saw coming and knew exactly what to do.
I'm thinking about also how you and I have been around for a few decades, and people who are older than us, likely our parents too, have indicated how important it is to learn from our mistakes, which is
Right.
easier said than done. But in this case, with those evaluating organizations, and often it seems as though they're private, following business models, I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for how, with monitoring, let's say, the ESG performances of companies, one could envision improving the evaluation model, maybe even asking if it being privately based is best, or if it might be good to consider also a government based evaluation model.
Well, again, I'm probably more conservative than you are, but I have some question about the how government might do it, or whether they do it from a kind of level playing field. There's kind of a strange world. Let me digress here just for a second. Economists don't often agree about a lot of things, but I think economists do agree in regard to the environment that climate change is a problem. There may be some question about whether it's a catastrophic problem or a manageable problem. Anyway, almost everyone agrees, every economist agrees that it's a problem. Secondly, they agree that there's a really good way of dealing with it, and that would be with some kind of broad-based carbon tax. That would be much superior to mandating particular technologies or having green roofs on buildings or whatever it might be. But politically, that's a non-starter. So no government's willing to, or maybe a few in Western Europe, but governments not willing to impose a carbon tax that would not be minimal. It would be actually a substantial tax that would have some bite. And that bite would actually encourage people to make the decisions in a very efficient way about limiting carbon emissions. But that's sort of off the table. So we get these kind of second best arrangements or attempts at arrangements that I think are not very good, but maybe the best we can do at this point.
That's a great digression from my point of view. And I agree that whereas in the European Union, where carbon pricing is really developing, maturing now, that in the United States, especially at the federal level, it's difficult. Although we have seen in our monitoring how it does seem to be getting off to some kind of a start in individual states in the United States.
Yeah.
And it's, I suppose, possible that that might continue reaching some kind of tipping point in the future.
Right, I think so. The point there, the real problem, I'm now talking as an economist, not as an investor, but the real problem there is something called the free rider problem, and that is that California's would be one of the richest countries in the world if it were an independent country, and they could do everything in the world, everything possible to deal with climate change and carbon emissions. It would have virtually no impact on the world because they're a small part of the whole world operation. Unlike a lot of kinds of pollution, where if you burn next door to your neighbor, they get the soot. Global climate change is really a worldwide kind of thing. So you can make horrendous sacrifices to try to improve things in a small area, but unless other people do that in other parts of the world, it's not going to have much effect. So the real problem with, the key problem with dealing with carbon emissions is finding some way to have a worldwide consensus about dealing with it, and the consensus would have to include India and China, and and we don't have world government, so we can't pass a law that makes everyone do it. So there's suggestions about ways of doing that. For example, imposing tariffs on countries that aren't cooperating, like China or India, things of that sort. But those are far from being effective at this point. So that's a real fundamental kind of problem in terms of dealing with the issues.
Our sense is, listening to experts like you and others from the United Nations level with the Paris Agreement down to Champaign, Illinois, is that there are two primary movers for climate change mitigation. One is legislative, and the other is investment capital. And
right.
We just talked a little bit about a possible legislative approach that is being attempted in the European Union with carbon pricing and elsewhere. And it seems to be working in many
Right,
EU member states. They're not going bankrupt with carbon pricing
right,
at all. But at the same time, kind of going back to our bread and butter issue today, and that
right.
is investment capital, it seems like the transition that is taking place, as evidenced by the International Energy Agency data, and something that seems to be happening also with pension funds, could continue. Pension fund, I want to mention too that there are also large church communities like the Anglican Church of the United Kingdom that have decided to divest from fossil fuel. That kind of religious community decision making seems to be attracting more interest. Also, universities and colleges in the United States are doing that. But I'm wondering, and this is kind of my final question, and feel free to answer it as an investment person or economist or however you would like. What do you see happening? Maybe many say we have to do quite a bit by 2030 in the next short term as this transition toward a renewable energy economy continues in the investment capital area of things.
Well, there are long-term and short-term kind of considerations. For example, I think it would be very ill-advised to not for an individual, a church or an individual or foundation can do whatever they think is right, and it may be a kind of virtue signaling to a certain extent. But there has to be a bridge to get from where we are to where we want to be, and that bridge entails carbon-based fuels, and there some that are better than others. Natural gas is much better than coal, for example. So I would maybe if you wanted to say you're going to not invest in coal, it might be not unreasonable, but not investing in any kind of fossil fuels, I think it would be ill-advised. And there's also the short-term versus long-term. I think there's no doubt that 30, 40, 50 years from now, things will be a lot different. But does that mean we should not invest in any kind of gasoline-powered automobiles and only invest in EVs? And I think the answer probably is no in the short run. You might want to do a little bit of both, but there are cycles right now. Electric vehicles are not necessarily in great favor in the United States. They're not progressing as fast as we'd like. So while it might be a good idea from the standpoint of society to move in that direction, it's not necessarily true that investing in them is a good deal for pensions. And again, it's also a question of getting it right. I keep making these digressions, but if you go back 120 years and said horses and buggies are probably going to die out, should we invest in automobiles? And the answer probably is yes. But there were 100 different automobile companies, or more than 100 back in the early 1900s. And after it was over, there were 3 automobile companies. So getting it right in the very beginning was very difficult. You couldn't just invest in automobiles and make money. You had to get the right investment. So these things are very difficult. Like there's some environmental electronic vehicle companies that turned out to be pretty much dead end. Others seem to be doing well. So it's not just a matter of choosing the broad area; it's choosing the right one, which makes it very difficult.
I think I'd like to stop at this point. We've pretty much reached our 45-minute mark, and I would like to thank you very much for answering our questions today. And perhaps, as I often do with these interviews, ask if it were the case that during the semester we have some follow-up questions, if you might be willing to take a look at them and decide whether or not you'd be willing to answer a couple.
I'd be happy to. I actually, I don't know if you can tell, but I enjoy talking about these things. So I'd be happy to be involved in any way you think would be productive.
That is great. I want to thank you very much for that and for taking time in the beginning of January, doing something that we will be using between March and May of this year, and also talking to other people, as I kind of intimated, from the Paris Agreement level down to Austria, Vienna, and Illinois and Champaign as we go through our course.
Right. Yeah, well, thank you, Rich.